actually necessary, absolutely current topic, psychological safety and importance of human factors in leadership and team success. This is going to be the agenda. I will briefly take only 10 minutes. I'll briefly take only 10 minutes from the description to describe what are the roles and the suggested conduct. Then Gareth will take over the presentation, or our presenter, and we'll close with information for the next events. I'll share the PDUs. I'll also share a Menti meter, so you can answer the survey, how the presenter, or what did you learn? Were you satisfied by the topic that you learned anything, and the closure. The suggested contact is, as you know, typically since COVID, we've been using virtual connection more often, and you know that you have to keep your microphone on mute if you're not talking. Use your full name, please, on when you log in, so we can know and identify you when we have to give you the PDUs. If you like, you can share your video or stay off camera. We are trying for first time the Q&A section, and we are curious if you can see it and write questions on the Q&A section, because that's also very encouraged, and our speaker today is very interested about your opinions, and any questions that you have throughout the entire session, we will answer them by the end, because we'll have enough time for that. If you like, you can use the chat window to share your LinkedIn account, so we can connect with you further on after this session. And you're invited to connect with the speakers after the session, to get in touch with them, to search for them on LinkedIn, or make direct questions to the speaker if you don't want anyone else, if it's more personal, it's tacky question. This session will be recorded. I hope that everyone is okay with that. Thank you, Thomas. And except for us as organizers, no participants or AI bots of this event are allowed to make any recordings or transcripts of this event. Just briefly information for who are we and what is the PMI chapter of Germany. It's 20 plus local groups divided in 5 regions. And it's a very international community. It has 3,300 members and organizes different events, projects, and working groups on a regional and local level. And this is our team, local group Darmstadt. It's the only English-speaking group of the entire Germany chapter. It has 6 volunteers as of now from 5 countries. We are organizing, I'm very proud of that. We're organizing 2 events, English-speaking events for free every month. And so far we had around 2,000 participants. And from our understanding and the data that we have, 25 attendants have joined the sessions at least 10 times. We are organizing also face-to-face sessions once a month. And our LinkedIn room, you can find us on LinkedIn. We have around 350 plus members. And you can join us for free. The drum rolls for our speaker for today, Gareth. He is a 25-year military aircrew and system engineer, human factors and team preference expert, founder of the Human Diver and Human in the System, pioneered diving industry safety training, global high-risk domain trainer and speaker, published author on team dynamics and safety, and advocate. He's an advocate for psychological safety and leadership. And I will give the microphone now to Gareth so he can start with the presentation. We are all very eager to learn more from you about this topic. Thank you, Gareth, for being here.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I don't like introductions because I don't realize what I bring. It's that curse of knowledge that you know stuff and you think other people do, and so what you share, you think, well, it's not that important. And then people say, can you come and give us a presentation on this? It's like, yeah, okay. So where this came about is earlier this year, I was at UMETSAT and gave 2 sessions, one in the morning, which was to the whole organization. And then I ran a 3-hour session with a number of heads of department. And Florian invited me into this, came up to me at the end of the session, said, I'd really like you to come and give a presentation on this to the team. So this is very similar to the presentation that I gave at UMetSat. And I'm going to go into, where are we, at the top? There we go. Right. So here we go. I'm going to put my mouse up the top. We can go. Right. So what we're going to talk about psychological safety, understanding this bit between success, failure, and learning cultures. And before everybody arrived, Thomas and I were just talking about, success is not an objective measure. And I said, actually, failure isn't either. And one of the things to bring to the fore is the fact that we want to create, or if we want to, really improve, we've got to create a learning culture. And cultures aren't created by the leadership. What happens is they create the conditions that surround behaviors, and the behaviors then develop the culture that's there. So what we've got to do then is actually foster the environment in which learning can happen. And so I've got a number of topics we're going to cover as we go through the next 50 minutes, 60 minutes or so. So to start off with, I will fail in this workshop. And that's starting out there and saying, look, the reason why I'm going to fail is that I know much more than I can get into this conversation. I know much more than I can actually articulate. So the way that conversations work, we trigger ideas and thoughts, and the number of podcasts and interviews I've done, we've had a plan, and the plan never actually survives first contact because we disappear down little rabbit holes. Now, as a presentation, it's a bit sort of one way, but we do have a Q&A at the end. So that will certainly be emergent, and we'll get some ideas as we come out of that. Now, Maria sort of touched on my background, 25 years in the Royal Air Force. I was flying on Hercules transport aircraft. In the sort of tactical and strategic roles, became a flight instructor, left the front line, then did a master's degree, and then ended up in systems engineering, research and development. And I've got a couple of, I've done Prince 2, APMP, and also managing successful programs. And the interesting thing there was actually when you go out to organizations, or especially in the MOD, those processes don't get used. Here's what we should do, and actually we don't use them as they're supposed to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So I left the Air Force in February 15, working in high-risk industries in the diving space, which is where I'm mainly known for, but also in oil and gas and healthcare and software teams, construction that I've just done. And because people are people. It's just the stories that change. So what I'm going to give you is some ideas and thoughts, and then you're going to have to abstract, or to say, how do I apply this, or ask me a specific question. And sort of touched on, written a number of academic papers, just finished a second master's degree at Lund University on storytelling to learn. What happens underwater stays underwater. So what are the factors that help storytelling so that we can learn following an adverse event? And there are many barriers, and so that paper is available, and I put a presentation together, and I'll supply some links. And in 2019 I published a book called Under Pressure, which is all about storytelling and bringing high performance teams to life. So this evening I'm just going to talk about these topics as we go through. Start off with survival, not just a sort of a safety thing, but also a business point of view. Touch on complexity from the safety science side of complexity, a little bit about psychological safety and why it's so important, and the underpinning of what goes on in terms of learning from innovation and learning from failures, and the need to develop something called a just culture, which is really hard to do, but it's fundamental if we want to learn from what happens out there. And then we'll take some Q&A. I can't see the Q&A, which is good, which means it's not going to distract me. So I've limited my errors straight away. So survival is not of the fittest, but of the most adaptable to change that's out there. And Darwin often gets misquoted with this bit of, survival of the fittest that's out there. And but what does fittest mean? And actually what we're talking about is the ability to adapt. And those who have come across this term before, VUCA, volatility, or volatile, complex, uncertain, and ambiguous environments, came from the US military, 30 odd years or so ago. And now we've got other terms that basically bring this stuff to life. And the reason why it's important in the business context, not just the high risk operations, is the fact that the world is moving on. And if we just stay doing what we're doing, we're going to fall behind just because everybody else is accelerating away. And that means that we don't know what the future is going to look like. We don't know with 100% certainty what the future looks like. And that can cause issues. It can cause emotional issues and it can cause organizational issues. Where do we go next? And in a complex space, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail later, there's often a need to hypothesize and run experiments. Now, one of the ways to consider being adaptable is using the knowledge within your teams. And these are a couple of ideas here: red team thinking or red teaming. US Army term taken from, in effect, the Israelis, and that's why the World War Z image is there with a 10th man. What we want is an established devil's advocate within our teams. We want to nominate somebody and say, okay, Thomas, you're going to be the devil's advocate on this activity, and I want you to pick holes in our plan, intentionally pick holes, and counter what we're doing, challenge what we're doing. And now we need to move that role around, because otherwise Thomas gets stuck with the label of being, oh, it's not Thomas again, finding holes in what's going on. So there are some resources and tools out there that from a project management point of view, I'd highly recommend going. And what you'll realize as I go through this presentation, I'm going to put books and things like that up here, and I'll share the resources afterwards so you can go and find them. Again, we go back to the point, I can't give you everything in this session. Another book, and it's this bit about thinking in systems and understanding the difference between simple, complicated, and complex systems. A simple system is where the linear cause and effect is obvious, where we can take the domino out of the chain or the link out of the chain, and the cause and effect stops. Now, mechanical systems, simple mechanical systems work like that. When you involve people, it's not like that. Complicated systems require knowledge and time to create and maintain and service and adapt. I put this Jenga tower up here because I use it in the trainings to show that actually we could put this tower up, we could knock it down, and looking at that picture, we could probably put it back together again, how it's built. A jet engine is complicated, but as soon as we start putting people involved in a system, it then becomes complex because we cannot predict with 100% certainty what the future is going to look like. If we play a Jenga game and we knock the tower down and then we rebuild it and we try and win, people will build it differently because there are different goals and we've learned things. When you run projects, the knowledge that you gain from one project then influences the next project. It will never be the same thing again. Now, what we're talking about here is complex situations, and those who've been involved in the safety domain may recognize this as James Reason's Swiss cheese model. And actually what he was talking about is the barriers and defenses that are in place at the organizational level, the supervisory level, what we do to set ourselves up for success or failure, and then the slips, lapses, and mistakes we make in the unsafe acts. Those holes, they move, they open, they close. But it's only when those holes line up is it obvious where the failure is. Now, those barriers are never perfect because they're built by humans. So what we're trying to do when we apply human factors and safety science is close those holes down as much as we can, but we're never going to get to zero. And so what we've got to recognize when we move into this Jenga tower is the fact that the tower, the system, is stable even when there are holes in it. And this is one of my instructor candidates at a training course February last year. And there's another guy behind the camera, Pepe, who is filming. And we should hear the volume or hear the noise in a second. Look at what you're leaving for me. Now, just think about when you're in a project, you inherit stuff. You inherit a broken system. It's an incomplete system. Humans finish the design. Now, in a traditional sort of safety environment, what we talk safety one or traditional safety, Andreas pulled a brick out. It was his fault. He's the last to touch it. Off you go. And it's like, but hang on a minute, look at all of the other holes in the brick in the tower. Well, it's still his fault because he should have seen those. And one of the problems then is in reality, we've got a system where we believe that things are safe. This is the complete process and how we manage risk in an organization. And leaders look top down and they see this and they go, hey, it's all great. But actually, if they go out there and find out what work is really like, then they see all of the holes. And those holes aren't because of incompetent people. They're because of these things here: workarounds, adaptations, optimizations, errors, the normalization of risk. It's about getting business done. Now, this is, from a leadership perspective, you can't just look top down and measure your KPIs because that gives you no idea about what's going on. You've got to go out there and have conversations and find out where the gaps are in your system. And that's not easy if we don't have psychological safety and a just culture. Now, the other thing about a complex system is that, as this sort of phrase on the wall says, none of us is as wise as all of us together. We each have our own little perception, our own little snapshot of the problem space. And we think, unless we're in a curious environment, learning environment, we think what we've got is right. What we've got to do is piece those stories together. And those stories, the sum will be greater than the parts themselves as we bring that together. But again, we've got to create the environment where people can tell those stories. In a very strict hierarchical organization, those stories get suppressed because we don't want to hear that. We only want to hear the truth, my truth, not your truth. I don't want to hear that because that's not right, even though it may be the right thing in terms of the perceptions we're talking about. So we've got to create the environment where we allow that information to rise up as we go along. And that talks about perspectives. So in a simple or even a complicated system, the image in the top left is technically correct. We've got a cylinder and we've got two sources of light that are basically showing or creating shadows, lights and then shadows. And they're both true in a simple technical system. But as soon as we get people involved, we can now move from, say, the right-hand side, and then we move to the left-hand side. So actually we have a perspective that goes from a hard square shadow through to a hard circular shadow. In a social technical system, we create that understanding. Our local rationality of what we're doing right in the middle of the maze of everything else that's going on around us is the truth. It is our truth. And what we've got to do is create the environment through debriefs, or that's a tool, an after action review or a retrospective. Create the environment where we can ask the correct questions, the better questions that are out there, and ask, how did it make sense for people to do what they did at that time? Because truth does not exist in absolute terms in a social technical system. And that, when we talk about success and failure, is a critical thing to take on board. And just to show what it means to take a different perspective, we'll look at the video in the top right hand side. A simple task, well, sort of juggling, but now from a different perspective. Now she's going to throw two balls behind her back and watch the adaptation she does when it happens. Now, when we see juggling, we normally see it from the front plane and we see what's there and we see the balls go up and down. And it's like, hey, that's cool. We might see them move from side to side, but generally we don't get that same perspective of now looking down. And just think about when you go and observe work or you go and see somebody else's activity, you're in a leadership position, you have a perspective, a perception about what happens based on your own previous experiences. Again, we go back to that piece about constructing meaning from little bits of information. We've got to create the environment where we get as much as we can but it's never going to be the absolute truth. We're going to make sense. Now, one of the ways of doing that is talking about diversity. And in many organizations, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm going to break through those or break those down before we move into the psychological safety piece. Now, diversity, I mean, I've drawn them as two discrete things here. We've got surface level diversity, which is what a lot of DEI programs are about, making sure that race, color, creed, gender, age, location are all given the same equitable opportunities that are there, and we're all included. That, in effect, is the surface level diversity. But in an organization, what we want to do is not dismiss that surface level, but if we want to succeed, we really want to have deep level diversity as well. And that really is about how do we think differently? So you can have a very diverse surface community, but you all think the same way. Conversely, you could have a very homogenous group of white middle-aged men, for example, or black women who are 20 years old or so. You would all likely think the same way, but you can spread that. What we want to do is think differently to solve the problems. And so really what we're trying to do is explore the cognitive diversity within our teams. Now, I've framed it as a dichotomous question, which one's right or wrong, and I don't have the answers. What we've got to do is make sure that we have a spread of diversity of thought if we're operating in a complex space. Now, that's a mixture of those. And as I said, I've posed it there as a dichotomous question. It won't be. But if we do focus on one thing, then we miss out on others. Next bit is about equity. The difference between equality and equity. Do we give people the opportunities, the same opportunities to exploit or explore the system and the activities we're talking about? So in this case here is we give somebody a taller ladder, which allows them to pick the apples from the tree. Now, again, here's another question that is meant to be contentious. Where's the boundary between positive discrimination, we'll talk about targets, versus equity? So the UK military has struggled recently, and it's become a very political piece, is actually we prioritize minorities to fill seats in aircraft or military positions. Now, the problem here is, are they the best people for the job? And I'll go back to 2005 as part of my training, the first master's degree I did, we went to South Africa, and they were doing an activity at a national level, which was about putting people into roles based on the demographic stratification of the population. Now, what that meant is they ended up putting people from majorities, blacks, Indians, Asians versus whites, into senior management positions, and they hadn't got the training. And so the companies were failing because they weren't commercially competitive. Now, that is a really difficult problem to solve. We're providing equity, but actually that was about equality. We're giving people the positions, but do we give them the tools to operate in that space? So again, in the messy world of life, there is no black and white answer. What we've got to do is dig into this and understand what's happening, and we've got to create the conversations. Inclusion. What does inclusion mean? Well, start off with, it could be a team, it could be a football strip that you're dealing with. We are football supporters, we are included as part of that group. What about making sure as an organization we include the spectrum of people that's out there? Does that mean that people are included just because we've got that surface diversity? How does that work when you've got a stratification, a hierarchy within an organization? We've got our own little layers within there. Do people feel that they are part of the organization, part of a department, or part of, say, a task force or a small team that's there? How easy is it to speak up and challenge if you don't feel included? And I'll talk about that in a little bit more when we come on to psychological safety. Boeing, they've had a number of whistleblowers, and the guy here on the right, committed suicide. He gave his testimonials and said people are not listening, and then the pressures were too much and he committed suicide. So the first step when we talk about psychological safety, and one of the frameworks that's out there, is inclusion safety. Do I feel included? Not am I part of that team? Hey, look, you're in this team, therefore you're included. Do I actually have the social and emotional attachment that's within there? And I'll come on to that in a little bit more. So inclusion is not just about putting people into a box. It's about the social interactions we have. We are social creatures. And I know from the work that I do as a consultant, the work that I'm doing in the diving space, in the consultant space, that's easy because I know that's my role. In the diving space, I'm quite an outsider and I've not sort of grown up in the diving culture. So I don't know a whole bunch of these people, these famous names, but I want to challenge the status quo. And because I'm challenging the status quo, it's much harder because I want them to recognize the value, and that's not easier. And if you don't have inclusion safety, we don't start that process about psychological safety. So there's 3 books here on the screen. There's another one I'm going to come on to in a minute from Timothy Clark about the 4 stages of psychological safety. What is it? 1990s, Professor Amy Edmondson doing work looking at how healthcare teams managed in the complex environment they're in. How do they learn from mistakes and successes? And what she found was that, interestingly, the teams that reported the most incidents were also the ones that were most performing, and they had the best social scores within what's going on, the local trust that was happening. And what she recognized is because they'd got the environment they were in, they'd created it, and they recognized that people make mistakes, then people are willing to share those stories. So it's a shared belief that the team is safe for an interpersonal risk taking. So the bit here is, can I say something? Can I question the status quo? Can I make a social mistake? Can I say something and then it all goes quiet and you sit there going, well, that isn't what's supposed to happen? And then you sit there going, how do I learn from this? And the important piece here that Amy Edmondson brought out is that there is a strength associated with speaking up or staying quiet. If I speak up now, the response or the effect is immediate, and it could be negative. And I could be just feel really ashamed about what I'm doing, and any trust that's there has just been broken down. Or I could stay quiet. And if I stay quiet, what happens is the problem actually might go away. And so it isn't an issue. So what I'll do is I'll just stay here. Or I might just wait for somebody else to speak up and see what happens. And that's what we'll talk about, the 4 stages of psychological safety, that actually it's a building process that's there. So if we've got psychological safety, what we have then is the teams are willing to push the boundaries. They're willing to go out there and do something. They're willing to go above and beyond. And we talk about this idea of discretionary effort. The I have to do curve versus I want to do. Oh, I've got to attend this meeting. I want to attend this meeting. I want to contribute to the team. And you can, you can almost destroy a business when people work to rule, because there is so much that gets done in an organization that is above and beyond what they're required to do. Now, that can be a bit of a sort of a double-edged sword, especially if the leadership exploit it. Because if the leadership are just rewarding those results of the above and beyond, that discretionary effort, and then all of a sudden you go, well, we can't do it because of X, Y, and Z. Well, you did it the last time. So you reset the bar about what's acceptable. And so that goodwill factor isn't an endless bucket of effort that's there. Every time somebody goes above and beyond, we've got to reward them for that. But it has to be genuine, authentic. It doesn't need to be, as the Americans would describe, attaboys or a pat on the back for something that has to be said rather than actually as a value. So if we've got psychological safety in a team, there's shared trust and we all want to get better. So the 4 stages are talked about. We'll start off with the inclusion safety. We have to feel part of that team. And it's that bit of, do I know people? Do I know their families? Do I feel that we are working together as a team? When I join as a new starter, what happens? Oh, there's your desk, there's your computer, sit down and we'll tell you what you're going to do. As opposed to sit down and introduce people and build the personal relationships. Children naturally do inclusion safety at kindergarten, and then they start to learn behaviors from their parents. Kids don't, young kids don't care what gender or color of skin they've got. I don't really care. They'll go out and play. And you ask some of these kids, and they're like, "Oh, I haven't even noticed that they've got black skin or whatever," because they sit there and go, it's completely transparent to them. So the first bit then is include people. You build inclusion safety by practicing it yourself. I've just finished a work activity in Reston, Virginia, in the States. And the client that I was working for had invited some of their contractors and suppliers into the training system. They didn't have to, but what they were doing is building relationships with those individuals because they're all part of a much bigger team. So if you want to have inclusion safety, invite people in and listen. And when you invite people in, they start to look and see what's going on in the environment. They find out how easy it is to make a mistake and what happens when a mistake is made. People, if you're going to improve, you're going to have to go out there and push your limits and push your boundaries and innovate. And when you do that, a mistake could happen. And it's how we treat that that becomes important. So people will look for learner safety before they start to innovate and process that information. So if you want people to innovate, you've got to create that environment. And then we move into contributor safety. You're part of a team. We're shifted from being a sort of not quite a passive member, but now we're moving into the active team member position. And contributor safety works two ways. I've joined the team. And so in this situation, I'm expecting to be able to contribute to the team because that's why you've asked me on board. I've got some knowledge. I'm going to be part of this team. I've got some stuff. Here we go. Conversely, the team expects me to contribute. So if you sit there and don't contribute, you sit there going, what are you doing on our team? We've invited you to be part of us. So contributor safety goes both ways. And what we want to do is encourage people to bring up ideas. And when that happens, we reward people. So a lot of this is shaped by the leadership of the team. Speak up culture. We like to have a speak up culture in any of our organizations. And you go out there and do the HR surveys, the sort of the engagement surveys, and you go, yeah, I'd like to be able to speak up, but I can't. I fear that there's barriers there for us to speak the truth. So organizations say we want this speak up culture. We want, in effect, to have a challenger safety. And the thing here is, unless you've got the lower levels in place, you won't have that challenger safety. And it's leaders who create this whole structure, starting off with encouraging people in, then rewarding people when they make mistakes. And people go, yeah, but what if it's catastrophic? Do you think they meant to make that? It's understanding the conditions. Turning around and saying, be more careful, pay more attention, be better, does not contribute to that. And so doesn't contribute to learner safety. When people give ideas, the leaders support that and rally round. And challenger safety, what we're trying to do here is actually nominate and encourage constructive dissent. And when people challenge the leader goes, thank you. And that's it. They reflect on it. They don't get defensive because we want to create this whole environment where people can speak up and challenge. And that brings us into a concept that I sort of touch on here, but it's a much bigger topic. And it comes from the safety environment, primarily nuclear industry in the States, but then it's evolved. And it applies to any business. And it applies to not just the safety space, but all parts of an organization. And there are 5 principles that are that are core to this. And they're principles because they point us in a direction. And they're actually, they're interdependent. So the first one is human error is normal. We all make mistakes. We all have lapses. We all have slips, and we all adapt and modify our behaviors to get outcomes. So if error is normal, what's the point of punishing people for making those errors? Which then brings us on to blame adds no value. And in brackets, this would be adds no value to learning. Blame adds social value. It adds organizational value because people want to blame somebody because they have to be guilty. We have to have somebody whose fault it is. At an organizational level, we want to protect ourselves. At a legal and an HR and a litigation point of view, we want to blame a supplier because now if we don't, we own it. It costs us money. The next two are about how psychological safety fits into this. So context drives behaviors, and how you as a leader respond matters. So we are pattern matchers. We jump to conclusions all the time. We make assumptions all the time, and we can create the context that shapes our behavior. So what you reward gets done, and what you punish, people will go away from. So in the safety space, we have things like lost time incident rates, where we count the number of events that occur, and we might put a financial bonus on that. The problem is if we put a financial bonus on that, and so we keep the number there, then people will hide reported events. In the project management space, you often reward productivity to get something done, but where does quality come in? And how easy is it to speak up and say, no, actually, this isn't right, especially in the planning stage? And a lot of the safety work is done focusing on frontline operators, when in fact, the middle management and the senior management have these trade-offs as well. And that's why how you as a leader respond matters, because you want to reward the bad news. You don't want to just focus on the good news. If all you're hearing is good news, then you're missing a whole bunch of stuff. And Alan Mulally, who used to be the CEO of Ford, and his book American Icon by Bryce Hoffman, talked about his situation when he took over as the CEO. All he heard was everything's green, it's all going well. It's like, how can it be going well when we're losing millions each day? And it took him about 3 or 4 weeks of these senior executive team meetings before somebody said, I've got a problem. And he turned around and went, you don't have a problem. We, as the executive team, have a problem. What do you need to help? And it was this shifting of saying, actually, we can only succeed if we work together as a team. And the reason why the executive team behaved that way is because Alan's predecessor was a very punitive, punishment-based individual. And if you didn't hit the targets, you were fired. And you're sitting there going, okay, well, that's what drives behaviors. And then the final piece is about learning and improving and vital for success. We've got to create the environment where people can talk about what's gone well, why, what do we need to improve, and how we're going to do that. And you may have noticed I didn't say what's gone wrong, because if we say what's gone wrong and nothing's gone wrong in our perception, then the value of the debrief disappears really quickly. But if we have a continuous improvement mindset, what can we improve on and how can we do that, then actually there's always value for a debrief. Now, in the safety space, we have these definitions of errors and violations, and I've intentionally colored them as greens as being acceptable and violations being as unacceptable. And the question I normally get from this chart here is, what's the difference between a mistake and an unintended violation? And the only difference is there's a set of rules. And if there's rules that are being broken, but I believe that I'm following them, what's the point of punishing me? If everybody is breaking the rules to get the job done, what's the point of punishing an individual? And so we sit there and go, what's the context? Often organizations put rules in place to stop bad things happening because of the recklessness at the bottom. But actually, all of those provide learning opportunities, even the recklessness at the bottom, although it doesn't really exist in many places. But that's an indication that your HR policy isn't necessarily working, or HR recruitment is being driven by having bums on seats. We've got to get X number of people in. There we go. We've hit our target. Yeah, but they don't meet our quality. That's not our problem. That's yours. You gave us we've got to have bums on seats. So if we look at the bigger system, then we can start to learn from the failures that are going on around us. We've got to create that environment. But if we're consistently having rules that are broken, that's not an individual problem. That's a systemic issue that needs to be addressed. And that's much harder because now the organization, the leadership have to turn around and go, hey, we've got some part to play in this. So if you've got program managers sitting above your project managers, sitting there going, okay, what is it we're driving? And that'll be the corporate level. It could be, a national level is driving certain behaviors. And that's why we need to look at these things at a systems level. But what does a failure mean? It doesn't exist on its own, as it says here. A failure of a component or a process, a failure to do a job or achieve a goal, the failure to be an awesome project manager, the failure to be a good parent, failure to be a successful child. All of these things have got something associated with them. Also, failure is contextual. So we talk about agency and attribution. Agency is what we give to an object or a person about its role in an outcome. So Anglo-Saxon language is very much agency focused. The person knocked the vase over versus the vase was knocked over. And it might appear to be, well, that's a really subtle difference, but it's really important because when we look at things going wrong, if we write the person knocked the vase over, we focus on the person straight away. If we write the vase was knocked over, we then start looking at the context. And learning happens from looking at the context, not from the actions themselves. It's post-event. So we can't say, oh, you're going to fail to do this. Well, in that case, I'm going to make sure I don't. I'm going to be really driven to make sure I don't fail. So we can only really ascribe or attribute failure after something has gone on. It's subjective. They failed to achieve a high score. Well, what does a high score mean? They failed to hit the budget. They failed to hit a profit margin. What's the normal around there? And what's the context that's shaping things? So just to say somebody has failed, you need to provide a whole bunch of other stuff on there, especially if you want to learn. Now, another piece here is that to fail at something, you must have done something. Now, this bit here is no action means the clock chooses the action. If you're in a system like a project or a high-risk activity, flying an aircraft, right, I'm running low on fuel. I've got to do something. No, I'm just going to sit here and the problem will go away. No, it won't. You'll run out of fuel and the aircraft will crash. So the clock forces your decisions. If you're in a project and the deadline's coming up, if you don't do something, the system, the clock, the environment will make that decision for you. Now, something to consider is this little, I thought it was quite a cool cartoon, bringing this stuff to life. You might recognize that the first line of the master's results is the same as the beginner's results. You've got to go out there and practice and fail and improve and learn and succeed. And what we're talking about here is mastery is not just about getting it right. It's about getting it right consistently and when under stress and other performance shaping factors that are there. So how do we improve? Well, we've got to go and reflect on what we've done. So it could be an after action review. It could be, I'm just trying the Scrum ones again, the retrospectives or debriefs, which is what I talk about. And what are you going to reflect on? The technical aspects of the task, non-technical skills or crew resource management? What about the social or cultural activity or the much wider system? How did the system behave and why did the system behave the way it did? What was shaping those behaviors? And we go back to the complexity piece. What's nudging us to behave a certain way? And these are a couple of things that I will share with Maria and she can send out as resources. A debrief. So debrief itself follows a structure and the R is intentionally small. And the point here is we define the aims and goals of the task, mission. Did we achieve them? How long is the debrief going to be? Is it going to be 20 minutes, half an hour? The training simulations that I run, we do 10-minute missions and we debrief for an hour. And people sit there going, how on earth can you debrief for an hour? There's a lot to talk about. So define the aims and goals of mission. E, example, set an example, create psychological safety. As the leader, you talk about something that didn't go to plan or you made a mistake during that task. It is a learning environment. B is background or basics. It's about what happened in terms of planning and briefing before we executed the task. Did we set up our team up for success or failure? The reason why the R is small, because that's about reviewing the timeline, the chronological process that happened. Very little team learning improvement comes out of dissecting the timeline. I and E are about internal learning and external learning. Internal learning, what did I do well and why? What do I need to improve on and how am I going to do it? The team learning is, what did the team do well and why? And what do the team need to improve and how are they going to do it? And we do a technique called think, write, share, where we think about those ideas, write them down, and then share amongst the team. And that way that reduces group think and boosts psychological safety. And then F is about fix, follow up, or file. It's about you've just planned the activity, you've executed it, you've debriefed it. What are you going to learn? And something that sort of makes people smile in these sorts of environments. I know, I'm guessing most of you will have lessons learned books. And I would argue that you've probably got lessons identified books rather than lessons learned books. And the difference of lessons identified is you collect this in a data repository, but do you do anything with it? And a lesson is only learned when you've taken that identified lesson, you've hypothesized about a change, you've put that change in place and see what's happened. Did it create a successful outcome or a failure? Actually, they're both learning opportunities. So I would just think about what you've got in terms of lessons learned versus lessons identified. Next bit is about how you frame something. And another great book, so this was mentioned earlier on, Amy Edmondson's latest book. And it's this bit of, we can have success and failure in a system. We can have success with failures because it depends on what you're trying to do. You could argue that Elon Musk and his SpaceX is about success with failure. You know, the pushing the boundaries of what you can do in technical systems, you've got to have a fair chunk of money to be able to do with that. But actually what we're talking about is going out there. Success without failure is much harder, and that requires significant reflection. Organizations measure safety by its absence, not its presence. You can't create safety in of itself. You can create the conditions that lead to safety, and that's about developing high performance teams and creating resilience. But if you are only measuring success because you haven't had failures, you have no idea where you are and how close you are to a failure boundary. And now you can create environments, which is what I do in the training programs, is I sit there in primarily using a computer-based simulation tool, 10, 15, 20-minute missions, and we force people into situations where they will fail. They will fail in their task, but they will learn about themselves and they will learn about their team and they will learn to improve. And it's this, what I talk about high velocity education, rapid iterations of activities that we then learn and improve as we go along. And in 2 days, we get 5 missions done. People are quite emotionally tired by the end of the time, but they've really learned the value of a debrief and a reflection. And that's really what the purpose is. In an organization, going out there and finding out what normal work looks like. I said that, you know, safety is not measured by its absence. It is in many organizations, but that's not true. What we want to do is find out how people are predicting stuff, how they're monitoring, how they're adapting, and how they're learning. And that's what we talk about here as resilience. And there's an aspect of something called learning teams. Go out there and find out what normal work looks like. What are the adaptations, the workarounds, the shortcuts, the deviations to get stuff done? It's not just frontline operators. I can guarantee that all of you on this call will have to adapt your work from what's written down, what you're supposed to do, to achieve the goals that you do. And your skill at that is based on your experience and your resilience. And when things go wrong, you're able to identify that early and predict as we go along. And that leads us into something called a just culture. Psychological safety and a just culture are different. Well, some people may have heard of this term if they're involved in healthcare and aviation, maybe nuclear, but that's really where the core ideas are. And the thing is that psychological safety creates, or you're creating the environment where people can make minor mistakes, that they can contribute ideas, they can challenge that status quo because they recognize that something needs to happen and we're going to prevent an adverse event from occurring. But we've got to create that social setting, and that's where leaders count. Then we have an adverse event, and there's a couple here. One is the grounding of a vessel in the Baltic, and the other one is Deepwater Horizon. And it's very easy at this stage to go, point fingers, you're last to touch it, especially the more severe we make the outcomes. But if we've created an environment before this adverse event occurs, then we can sort of rely on this just culture. And this just culture is the recognition that we all make mistakes. It doesn't matter how experienced we are. What we're doing is we want to learn from that local rationality. How did it make sense for you to do what you did? Now, the reason it's reactive is because you've got to have an event and you've got to look backwards. But a psychologically safe environment supports a just culture because I can then ask questions and you're not fearful of giving the truthful responses. If the investigation stops with human error or something similar, then actually it's not worth it at all. If you do 5 whys or root cause analysis, where you're looking for a single failure point, you'll pretty much guarantee to come up with more training needed as a recommendation or better leadership or management. We need to have stronger management that's there. Those don't help us at all. What we're trying to understand is how it made sense, that local rationality. What are the conditions of possibilities that people face to execute their task? What are the drivers? What do we reward people for? Because what we want to do is go much beyond they didn't follow the rules. They weren't paying attention. They weren't careful enough. Move beyond that. And once we move beyond that, then we start to really learn. So this is my sort of final piece in terms of a question. So I'd said this, we can either do this in the Menti or we can do it in chat. Doesn't bother me either way. In chat's probably easier to copy and paste, then Maria can send it to me unless you've got a Menti straight away. You're on mute, Maria. Human error, don't worry.
The Menti is technically with predefined questions, and it's about
Okay, brilliant. So in the chat, what I'd like you to do is answer the question, what thing are you going to do differently tomorrow based on what I've just presented?
And we have already 2 questions.
Good. Okay, well, that then takes me on to this piece. So what I'll do, as I've learned this, I'll give people about 60 seconds to write their thought down to answer that, and then I'll go through the questions because people can't listen and write at the same time. So I'll stop the share and I'll see what comes up in chat.
Chetan or Chetan, correct me if I'm wrong. He says,
I can see the chat here, so that's really cool now. So I've got the chat. I can't see the Q&A. Chetan.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry if I'm getting you to think. Sorry. That's just the way it is for me. I don't know if you can do this anonymously in here. That might be a limiting, might not be a psychologically safe environment. Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you, Maria. A book I'd highly recommend is called Leading with Vulnerability, and just talking about, to your bit about start counting my failures, is actually just talk about those, because the easiest way for leaders to create that psychologically safe environment is to talk about their failures and mistakes. You're not perfect, and yet your teams will expect you to have all the answers. You don't have them. Excellent, some good ones in here. Right, I'll give it another 30 seconds and then you can ask me the questions, Maria.
Okay.
And while people are doing that, I can send you a couple of documents, PDFs. Can you share them out to people then?
Yes.
Cool, brilliant.
Typically, we that's what we do by within 24 hours or 48
Cool.
hours, we respond
Brilliant.
back.
I will send you some PDFs straight after this that you can share. Excellent. So what are the questions you've got there, Maria?
Yeah. One is from Thomas, and he's asking, what is the incentive for top management to actually foster a culture and environment which you described? What is it for them?
Yeah.
What is the buy-in? How do you convince them to try?
It's a really good question. And it's one of this, why should I care? Now, there are a number of answers to this. One is you can't fix a secret. So from that point, is there stuff that's going on inside your organization that will be causing risk, creating risk, corporate risk? Especially in the safety space where people do things differently to what's written down. So work is imagined and work is prescribed. So you'll have an idea about how a project should be run. Then you write down the project specifications and you'll task people to go off and do stuff. They will pick it up and go, that doesn't work in this situation. What I'm going to do is X, Y, and Z. But if I've got a punitive environment, I know my project manager or program manager, the management don't like deviations, I'm going to keep that to myself. And the problem is when things go wrong, then stuff starts to come out the woodwork. And you go, why did you do that? And you start to get punished because you've now had a project go wrong. So the first bit is you can't fix a secret. You've got to find out what's going on. And if people trust you and believe that you're looking out for them, then they're going to provide more effort. That's that discretionary effort piece. And one of the challenges is in modern Western business, you reward performance without understanding how you actually got there. So those high performance individuals bounce around and leave a trail of destruction behind them. And then that gets found out later on as a latent risk. Did that answer, Thomas?
It was
Excellent.
Thomas Hagen.
Oh, okay. Different Thomas then.
Yes.
Thomas Hagen, did that answer?
I hope he listened. He's present and he listened to the answer as well.
Okay, no worries.
Maybe
We'll
he
take
has
the next
technical.
question then.
All right. It's actually from me, and I have several questions. From your experience, what are the most common challenges organizations face when trying to implement DEI and psychological safety practices, and how leaders overcome these obstacles?
So the biggest obstacle is it goes against the whole management science piece of the idea of breaking down jobs, tasks into little things. And as long as we can fix the broken human, then we can put it back together again and off we go. And so there's a huge paradigm shift. And that's why when I run sort of exercises inside organizations, I use the Jenga tower. And I sit there and go, right, there's your activity. That's your business, your program. And if you're looking top down, all you see is the solid layer. Everything must be great because we're getting the KPIs rewarded. And you then sit there and go, right, let's look on the side. And now you can pull the last brick out. Well, was it your fault? Oh, no. No, there's a whole bunch of other stuff, right? How do you think the team feels in that? So it's that bit that it goes against the paradigm. The other bit is organizations have got a conflict between shareholder value and safety and operational perspective inside an organization. Because you sit there and go, we've got to make money for our shareholders. Because if we don't get the shareholders, people don't invest in us and we can't grow and so on. But actually, as an organization, you can go out there and find out what those gaps are and the innovations. You've hired professionals. Why wouldn't you use their knowledge? If you just want to get a bunch of robots, of just automatons who sit there and go, do this, do this, do this, you're going to fall way behind anyway, because they're the people with the ideas. But it's a hard piece, and say I'd highly recommend that book, Leading with Vulnerability, in which the author, and it's Jacob Morgan, it's either Jacob Morgan or Morgan Jacob, one of the two, and just talk about interviewing CEOs from big tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands size companies, and talking about being vulnerable. And when you go out there and talk about stuff that you don't know, and it's like, oh, but I thought the CEO knew everything. I can't. There's no way I can. But it's a very difficult and a very different way of thinking.
And just for my understanding, or perhaps for everyone else, because I've been studying a lot vulnerability lately. When you're referring to vulnerability, you're not talking about someone from the leadership who'll sit down and cry and say, "I cannot do this anymore." We're talking about someone who, despite the challenges, they'll admit that they don't know, but he's gonna stand firm on his position, and he'll gather everyone to realize the next step and make it happen, whatever they deal with the challenges.
So yes, but also
Mm-hmm.
no. So actually,
Mm-hmm.
there's a bit where there's trust and competence. So if you've got competence and you just sit there and go, I've had enough, I can't deal with this, and you break down, and people trust you as an individual and they believe you're competent, that sort of vulnerability is fine. If you have an incompetent person who stands at the front of the business and goes, I can't do this, that's it. That's not the same as being
Yes.
vulnerable.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
it could also be the bit where you sit there and go, you know what, this is all going horribly wrong. I don't have the solutions. You are the experts in your technical space. I can provide the sort of guidance and direction of where we're going. I need your help. I don't know how to, and people will pull together to solve those problems. So there are a couple of dimensions there. One is about trust, and the other one is about competence. And then you can lead with vulnerability relatively easily. But I think the more senior you are, the greater your effect will be if you turn around and say, I need a help.
Remove that armor of
Yeah,
macho and ego, and yeah. Yes.
absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
not it's not weakness
No,
as the
it's not. It's a
stereotype.
huge strength. And I
Exactly.
think that's a bit, it's like, oh, the boss said he doesn't know what the answer is. What a weakling. So an example I use in the healthcare environment, you go to a doctor with a bit of an odd ailment, something that's not standard. Would you rather your doctor said, hang on a minute, and got a book off the shelf and flicked through and try to find the answer? Or would you want them to go, yeah, I know what that answer is, off you go? And the
Yes.
confidence is there, and it might be completely wrong. Now,
Absolutely.
perversely, people go, yeah, I'd like them to know the answer straight away. Well, actually, they're unlikely to know everything. So, them saying, I don't know, can I just check, is actually a much stronger sign that's there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have another question. What
Mhm.
technique of approach do you recommend for collecting different perspectives, in quotations,
Mhm.
perspectives, and thinking systematically with different perspectives in mind, beside having representatives from various audiences interviewed included in your effort of or project? I can
So,
copy this on the chat.
yeah, so I'm going to share with you three documents. One is a debrief document, the other one's about building psychological safety in teams, and the other one is something called learning teams. And the idea is you create an environment where you encourage dissent from your team. So to get different perspectives, you've got to get first-hand perspectives, because your own perception will shape what you believe is going on out there. And that means that the organization has to build time into the project plan that says we're going to have a stand up, we're going to have a brief, and we're going to go through the execute phase. And then we're going to have a non negotiable debrief phase, because there will be gates that are in your project management plan, your schedule, that are non negotiables. There will be whatever those gates are, financial approvals, whatever. Make your debriefs non negotiables. Bring the key stakeholders and create that environment. And as I say, I'll share that debrief structure with you. How do you do it? You basically have a conversation, and there are some questions that I'll share in that debrief framework, and also the learning teams piece. But you need to then collect those ideas, and the first part of that, I'm going to say, learning piece is understand the problem. Humans want to jump to a solution space straight away. They will want to go, right, I know what the answer is, and off they go. But actually, they haven't understood that. So the first part of a learning team is understand the problem and the different perspectives and how it makes sense for each one of the players. Then you can start looking at the solution space after a little bit of a soak time. So it's an important bit about learning teams is you collect the ideas, you collect the problem space, and then sit preferably overnight, but you can do for a couple of hours where you're not thinking about that activity, and then you come back into the solution space. What should have been done? Why did it fail? What do we need to put in place accordingly?
All right.
Hopefully that one will help.
That was a question from...
Right, I got you. So you pasted that into it. I was like,
yes.
why is that all in a different font? So I can see why. There we go.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you, Renee. Diana made a question as well. She wrote, can you elaborate on how to get to the root causes or do a blameless debrief? I know that outcome more trainings or another meeting.
Right. So the first bit is in a complex system, you're never going to get to a root cause. So, and the easiest way I sort of get this across is if failure and success start from the same point in time and space. So at some point, the branches are going to change because of the decisions, and we won't know until we get a long way into the time whether or not it's a success and failure. So if we want to look for the root cause of failure, what would be the root cause of success? And that's quite the easiest way to sort of shut down we look for a root cause. In terms of how to learn from that, so learning teams is one, debriefs is another, but it's getting into a habit of digging into details. Look for specifics, not generalities. And that will be one of the things that comes out of that debrief framework that I send across to you. So can you elaborate on how to get to do a blameless debrief? Yeah. So when you run a debrief, as the structure that I've got, if the leader talks about a mistake or an error that they've made, and I've been there in training courses, and it's like, I had a finance director in a media company a little while ago. First day of the course, we talk about an error or mistake they've made that's noticeable, that they can remember. And this finance director said, I don't make mistakes. I can't. I'm in a business that can't afford to make mistakes. And to me, straight away, red flag, there we go. And by the end of the 2 days, it was like, yeah, I've done this and I've done that. And that's partly because of her senior leadership position, the inability to talk about that in front of her workforce, her peers that are there. So the debrief structure that I'll share with you has that bit that basically says, this is a mistake I made in this task. Be authentic, understand the context of how that occurred, and then what you're going to do differently next time to address that. And then go through focusing on actions and behaviors, not individuals. And by that, I mean, Maria, when your communication wasn't very good, that is about focusing on you. When you said this to me, the communication was not clear. So I'm focusing now on the communication, not you as an individual. Mm-hmm. And that when we talk about the debrief structure, we'll talk about what did I do well and why, what do I need to improve on and how. Focus on the behaviors. And those could be technical skills, but invariably they relate to communication, decision-making, leadership, followership, situation awareness, and understand what's the context that's there.
All right. You mentioned active listening, understanding the concept. For a project manager who are just beginning to introduce psychological safety into their teams, what practical steps can they take to start creating a more open and trusting environment for someone who, let's say that it's the only one who supports psychological safety. It's not supported by the organization, but he wants to ensure that the team, the cocoon that they're working in, is covered by psychological safety, and they can be free of talking failure, feel safe about suggestions.
So here's a test of psychological safety, Maria. Is this you?
No.
Good. Okay.
But it could be.
Yeah. So the easiest way to do it is be curious, not judgmental. Ask the question, how did it make sense for somebody to do what they did? Not, why did you do that? And again, the subtleties of the English language. Why did you do that, Maria? I'm asking you straight away to justify your decisions, your behaviors. But if I say, how did it make sense for you to do that? Now I'm focusing on your decision making, not on you. So changing language is probably the first bit. And one of those 3 documents I'm going to send over is about how to build psychological safety in a team. And there are 10 things for the inclusion, learner, contributor, and challenger safety, and what you can do out there. Inclusion, go and have some conversations, go and find out about people's families. Can't mix families, can't mix personal life and professional life. It's like, okay, who are you going to trust? Somebody I know a little bit about, or somebody who's just the automaton that sits in the corner? So be curious, not judgmental.
Right. Very good. Thank you. And I have one last question. I'm curious what are the measurements the organization effectively use to measure the psychological safety or DEI? You mentioned that you measure psychological safety not by the presence but the absence. What are the elements that are used for the measurements?
So there is a tool, and I'll forward this on. There is a 16-point metric which Amy Edmondson put together, and basically things like, how do you feel when you've got to challenge the status quo? How do people get treated when a mistake is made? And what we're looking at then. So when I talked about safety earlier, what I was actually talking, I suppose it applies to psychological safety. I was talking more about physical safety, health and safety, where we count incidents, we count accidents, and therefore we're counting unsafety rather than safety. But in the psychological safety space, there are metrics and tools that are out there. They should be used as part of a continuous assessment process. They are snapshots in here and now, and they're also done at a team level, not an organizational level. And the reason for that is it's really difficult to build trust more than sort of 15, 20 people. And organizations go, hey, we want to measure psychological safety across the organization. Really? That's not going to happen. So what you can do is you can do it at each layer within the organization, find out what the teams are like, and then you can sit there and go, what's it like for, say, the middle management to go and challenge the senior management? What's it like for the senior management to challenge the executive board? And what you probably find, as is the case for many organizations, the senior leadership think, hey, everything's hunky-dory. There's really strong psychological safety here. And it's like, no, because you're at the top of the tree, it doesn't matter what you say. If you now go and ask somebody sort of 2 or 3 layers down, could you go up to the CEO and ask a question about so-and-so? No. Right. Actually, I don't even know who the CEO is. So from that side, so there are some metrics, and I can share that across as a way of getting ideas going. Interestingly, I did some work a little while ago with an organization. We were talking about psychological safety, and I said, here's a survey tool that I can deploy with your teams, and we can do that, and then we can feed it into the activity. And they went, no, I don't think we want to do that. We don't. And it was like, well, there we go. There's an indication that you don't have psychological safety because you don't want to know what's going on. And it's like, to that point, you can't fix a secret. If people aren't talking about stuff, how do you address it?
Right. I have one more question from Stephanie. How much possibilities I have in difficult culture as a lower person, a runaway?
So it's a good point. So different cultures have got things called power distance. So we have a very steep authority gradient in some cultures where actually you're never going to say anything at all, whereas others have got a very flat culture. So there is a national cultural dimension to that versus an organizational one. But I know that if an organization is committed to it, they can change that. So I was working with somebody who was doing nuclear power in the Arab Emirates. And one of the major investors was a South Korean engineering company. And they've got a really steep authority gradient, big power distance. So you do not ever question the authority. And it took them like 2 or 3 years. And people would come to work and they'd behave like a Western culture with a relatively flat authority gradient. But as soon as they stepped outside the workspace, they revert back to national culture. So it can happen, but it requires real concerted effort on the behalf of the leadership in the organization. Did that help, Stephanie?
Thank you.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, thank you. I mean, I've got, well, that's my time. There we go. Saw it tick over just that then. So back to you, Maria.
I see one more question.
Yeah, go for it. I've got time.
How can we remove people from the problems and also maintain accountability?
I love it. How do we fire the bad apples because they're not doing their job properly? Now, my first question is, if they're not doing something, it's a consistent problem. What's happening in terms of your HR processes, your performance management? We'll do a once a year performance appraisal. That's not how you assess people. You've got to build trust and relationships. But if you get to the stage where this is a difficult person, you sit there going, yes, we can basically get rid of them. But then we've got to look at how did that get to that stage? And moving on to the accountability piece, here's another conflict that exists between the safety science and the management science. Accountability is your it. So Thomas Valenta, he's accountable for doing something because he's the only person who can be accountable to deliver that result. Now, in the safety science space, accountability is about telling an account. We can have backward-looking accountability. I want you to look back and we'll basically say, why did you screw up? And what's to blame? Can we fix that? Forward-looking accountability is, Thomas, this went wrong. What's the context? Tell us your story and what we could do going forward. And now I'm using you in a positive way to try and prevent something similar from occurring in the future. Responsibility. So the other piece there is responsibility. Accountability is telling an account. Responsibility is doing something. So you're responsible for putting something in place. Now, I get that is sometimes in conflict with the RACI diagrams or the RACI matrices, where we talk about responsible accountability, check and inform, or consult and inform. But it's that bit that says accountability in the safety science world, as used by management science, is just another word for blame. And blame adds no value to learning because, in effect, when you blame someone, all your learning opportunities disappear because everybody clams up and you don't find out what's going on. Right, you've got 8 minutes, Maria. Thank you.
Very insightful. Thank you. Everyone, thank you, Gareth, really. Everyone, I will share the link for the Menti and the code where you can access and vote on the poll. We will be very grateful if you can do that. That was the question and answer section that we just finished. And this is the Mentimeter. You can scan it, scan the QR code and go directly and answer it through your phone. Or you can open through the link and type in the code that I shared on the chat. I would like to share the next event so you can make sure that you are going to register on those and be participants and learn something new of the next topics that we have on the 19th of August at 6 o'clock, the same time. Lessons from the Miracle on the Hudson with Kathleen Langone. She will share the experience about or the lessons learned. She is a speaker from the US. On the 26th of August, we will have face-to-face the monthly roundtable, and everyone can join. On the 4th of September, we'll have stakeholder management for project success, lessons learned from multi-site project execution from Cleo Bell Lewis from Jamaica. And on the 18th of September, we have a wonderful, for everyone who is interested to pass the PMP certification, we have a presentation from the trainer, Gabor Stamp, who will talk about how to pass PMP in 8 weeks. The local Darmstadt group, where we are the organizers, is comprised by the members, the 6 members from 5 countries. Thomas Valenta is our elite member, a PMI fellow. Florian Adrien, he's from France. Mohamed Rezi from Afghanistan. Elena Petrovska from North Macedonia. Myself from North Macedonia, and Tufik Habli from Lebanon. If you're interested, you can learn more about our chapter on LinkedIn, or you can find it on the page, more information about us, and you can join the team because we are very diverse. We speak English, and we contribute. The DEI is supported here, and we contribute with our backgrounds, with our experiences that we bring, and with the various of networks that we know, familiarity with people that we have, and we create more better and diverse presentations. And for those interested for the PDU code to claim the 1 hour or the 1 point, this is the code. You can take a screenshot now if you want. Or write it down somewhere.
You will get an email later.
Exactly that too. Yes. Oop. Were you able to?
Yeah, Gareth, thank you for joining us and giving that speech. It was really enlightening, I think, and I hope a lot of our attendees get a lot of ideas how to change, how to read, and you presented some books and some readings and some ideas. And I think that's what good speakers do. They enlighten the view how to change. Yeah. Give the seeds.
I'll put my LinkedIn link in the chat if people want that, and they can find me on LinkedIn there. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's been really cool. As you can see, I'm a little bit passionate about this stuff. So thank you, and enjoy the next sessions, because the Hudson one sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, you can join it.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. You shared a lot of pearls here. We learned a lot of things, and we are grateful for having you.
Not a problem at all. And thank you to Florian, who's not here, so you can thank him without being here. So excellent.
Definitely will.
He's enjoying Italy right now for his family business, and I can really recommend. You saw the countries where we are from. Two of our ladies are from Northern Macedonia, and if you haven't been there, it's really worthwhile. I have been there 2 times. I always enjoyed it.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.